The Charlotte Podcast Festival is presented by Blumenthal Performing Arts, the Queen City Podcast Network, Eclex Creative Agency, and WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the home of acclaimed podcast Charlotte Talks, She Says, The List, Amplifier, Southbound, and FAQ City. Learn more about WFAE and our latest podcast, Work It, at WFAE.org.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this session of the Podcast Festival. If you are here tonight, I want to make sure you're in the right place. I know you want to make sure you're in the right place. Spoiler alert, even if you're in the wrong place, you're in the right place tonight, all right? You are here for finding your voice in a male-dominated industry. That is this current session. Like I said, if you weren't supposed to be here, stay, because it's going to be good. We have a few things for you, but before we jump into that, I want to give you some housekeeping notes. So first and foremost, your session is being recorded. So you will receive these recordings about a month after this session. We'll wrap up and send it out to you guys. So if you have to step away, if something comes up, you don't have to worry about missing anything. We will make sure you get a recording of this session. It will be yours to treasure forever. Isn't that a prize? So far at this podcast festival, we have almost 13,000 people registered and attending this 4-week session. So you are among some brilliant and excited podcast people. I do have to mention this podcast festival is brought to you by WFAE, Blumenthal Performing Arts, Queen City Podcast Network, and Eclex Creative Agency. All 4 of those have come together to bring you guys some incredible content. And I am Tiffany Bryant Jackson. I will be your moderator today. I'm going to be asking these ladies some great questions, but then I'm going to throw it to you guys. So please know when I do start marinating, getting your mind ready, because I'm going to throw it to you. So I want to dive back right in and get to talking about this, because I think it's something important. We're here for a little women's empowerment. Sisters are doing it. I'm not a singer, so don't complain when you have like feedback about my ability. I had to. Okay, so listen here. Podcasts are predominantly male. The voices have been. The top rating podcasts have been predominantly male. However, most podcast listeners by research have been found to be women or non-binary. So where's the gap? What's happening in this industry where the voices being raised are a little different than the voices who are speaking? So I'm going to let our podcasters introduce themselves first. They're going to tell you a little bit about their podcast, and then we're going to jump into some questions I have about how they are working in this world right now. So first, I'm going to throw it to Erin from Blue Tide Creative and the Advent Coworking Podcast. Tell us more about you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tiffany. And first off, thank you to everyone who is joining us tonight and those who are going to be here for the replay. We're so glad you could join us for this session. So my name is Erin Breeden, and I, during the day, makes it sound very dramatic. My daytime Clark Kent job is I am the founder and head mermaid of Blue Tide Creative, which is a public relations firm that focuses on strategy, branding, business consulting, and just making sure that your messaging matches your mission. On the podcast side, I am very honored that one of my clients here in Charlotte, Advent Coworking, has a podcast studio and knew they wanted to do a little bit more with their studio. So I actually trained in the studio to learn the equipment. And then they eventually was like, I think we want to have a podcast. And I was like, that's a great idea. You should have a podcast. And they're like, okay, well, you're going to figure out what it's going to be about, and we want you to host it. So that was a lot of fun. So Advent Coworking Podcast is a podcast for entrepreneurs, startups, small businesses, solopreneurs. It's very business focused and kind of goes about the good, the bad, the ugly of entrepreneurship and being in business. And so it's been an honor to help plan the podcast for somebody else. And then our tagline is the podcast for people who not only think outside the box, but who redefine it.
I love it. I love that tagline so much.
Thank you. I came up with it.
I'm going to throw it over to Bernadette. Tell us more about you and your podcast.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bernadette Joy. You can find me at my handle here. And I am the founder of Crush Your Money Goals, which was started from the podcast. I started a complete business by accident because I started a podcast 2 years ago. The podcast is called Dear Bernadette Joy by the same handle here. And I talk about my own financial journey and having paid off $300,000 of debt in 3 years, including my home, and answer questions primarily from women about all of the things related to money that the guys, the good old boys in personal finance do not talk about. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here. And you can also find me at crushyourmoneygoals.com. Aside from doing the podcast, it has been a great launching pad into other media. And so I also contribute to places like CNBC and Time. You can find articles there, my YouTube channel, and helping people one-on-one in my Debt Crushers community to help pay off debt. That's me.
Nice. Thanks, Bernadette. I have also joined a debt-free journey, so I feel you. I've watched some of your YouTubes. I'm there. We're on a journey. All right. Sheri, let us know more about you and your podcast.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'm really glad to be here tonight with such powerhouse women. So my name is Sheri Lynch. I've spent my whole adult life in that boys club that is commercial morning radio, and most of my career in syndicated network radio. When I got tired of being fenced in by that locker room mentality, I formed my own company and took my products independent. And today our radio show is carried in 65 domestic markets and 170 countries worldwide. I've been podcasting since 2006.
Wow.
So when I first started podcasting, we didn't even call them podcasts. We called them RSS feeds. And you want to talk about a boys club? You want to talk about like not a woman in the house? That was the early days of podcasting. So my approach to podcasting has always been a little bit different. I originally broke into podcasting as a way of augmenting my core business, which is radio, to create essentially a free-floating digital radio product for listeners to access anywhere. Since 2006, we've grown it, and now we have 3 podcasts in the marketplace. The one that we started with in 2006, a long-form narrative storytelling podcast, and a snack size podcast that we created and released about, I think it's about 3 years ago now. So believe me, I've been in this space where you're the only woman in the room, and have learned some good lessons and some hard lessons. And I wouldn't do it over any other way, because the end result, the endeavor is worth it, but you can't kid yourself. There are 750,000 podcasts out in the marketplace right now. There's a lot of competition, and you can't be anything less than excellent, whether you're male or female, when you get into that space.
Thank you, Sheri. I love the term snack size podcast. A little bite size so you can get it in without having to listen for hours. I love it. Alexis, tell us who you are and tell us more about your podcast.
Sure, thanks. My name is Alexis Carreiro. I'm a retired college professor. I got my PhD and started my teaching career at UT Austin about 15 years ago. And I was teaching at Queen's University for about 8 years and left just a few years ago because I think higher ed is having some issues. I think it's a little broken. I think students are paying too much and going into too much debt for too long in their lives, and I didn't want to be a part of that system anymore, so I left. Mm-hmm. Now I work full-time as a communication coach. You can see my handle there is the Pitch Prof. You can find information at thepitchprof.com. I specialize as a coach with women, so I work with anyone, but I specialize as a coach for women. My mantra when I work with women is speak up, stand your ground, take up space. I work with clients who are afraid of public speaking, and I also work with clients at HBO, the United Nations, S&P 500 companies. So anyone who's interested in increasing their communication skills and leveling up and helping them find their voice is really my goal. I want to empower people to share their ideas and stories with the world. So I'm very excited to be on a panel about voice because I'm super passionate about that. My podcast is called Fun with Failure. It's about individual and organizational resilience. And the tagline is, it's where we laugh with and at you about your flaws, fears, and failures. I started it as an antidote to all of the perfect social media filters that were out there. Everyone is just like living their best life and everyone's just glossed over. And first of all, I think it's boring. I get it, right? I totally get it, but I think it's a little boring. And I think that perfectionism is a plague. And it's one that I've certainly suffered from for most of my life. And I'm really trying to embrace the idea of failure as something positive because it's a totally natural and normal part of the learning experience, of the human experience. And we just freak out about it. I think especially as women, we're just perfectionists and we put so much pressure on ourselves that's unnecessary. So I just really wanted to share people's failure stories because I think when we share the ways that we've made mistakes, you help other people learn as well. So it's really about empowering people and paying it forward through sharing the mistakes that we've made because it's totally normal and it's absolutely 100% okay.
Yes, it is. Thank you. I'm going to agree with one of our people in the chat that said yes. Not meant to say it that way, but I'm going to say yes. Each and every one of you has given us a piece of something that's already empowering, according to people in our chat. You're already sharing something that people are relating to. So I want to dig in a little more about your voices in the industries that you guys have decided to work in. So some of you have mentioned, like, you didn't walk into podcasting. Like, you didn't wake up and say, I'm going to start a podcast. Like, it came about from something else. So I'm curious, when you decided to take a step into the podcast world, did you know how heavily male dominated it was beforehand? Or did you find that out as you were creating content and building your podcast? I'm going to let any one of you jump in. Who's dying to answer?
Sure.
All right. Erin raised her.
I raised my hand. It's like we're in school.
You did. You were.
I think that's a good question because, I'd always been interested in podcasting. I listen to podcasting. I love working the board and doing the tech portion of it. Hosting it was something that was a little interesting to me. And I kind of started suspecting very early that I was going to face probably different obstacles or different kind of questions than male counterparts. Especially with doing about businesses and entrepreneurs and solo entrepreneurs and startups. And we see a lot of that. I'm not sure everyone's markets, but I feel like here in Charlotte, you see the people who are talking about that are typically men. And they're talking about, the money you have to raise and all these different things. So I knew that I was going to have to really approach it in a different way. And there was sometimes with, because my client Advent Coworking asked me to do it, the founder of Advent is a man. And so there were a couple people who were like, why isn't Kevin doing this? Why are you doing this? And it was just immediately like I felt dismissed before the first episode came out. And then that got me angry. I'm a Scorpio, if that tells you anything. And I'm someone who does not like to be, you can ask my mom about this, told what to do or that I can't do something. Usually when I was little, my reaction would be like, watch me. Which she said at the time she wanted to be like that a girl and also like, you gotta watch this. But I realized that I had to work harder. I had a business for, at that point, almost 3 years. And I had, talk about failures, making mistakes left and right, learning about, LLC, S Corp, getting a CPA, how do you do your taxes quarterly, like all these things. And I knew I had something to contribute. And I knew that I wished that somebody had told me about a podcast like this, especially with a woman as a host when I was starting my business. Of just, going through the good, the bad, the ugly, like Alexis was saying, we take off that filter, really show what it's like. I knew I had to work harder, and I had to make sure that when I booked my guests, that I had very strong guests that were engaging. And I purposely did it at the beginning where I did invite a good amount of men in business to be my first guest, because I was like, all right, trial by fire, let's show what I've got. Let's show, my chops of asking questions and really getting thoughtful conversations going. So it was interesting, but it was pretty much from day one, before I even recorded the first episode, that I had people who were already doubting me and my ability to talk about business on a podcast.
I can see where that comes from. And I can see, I too have the watch me personality. It's probably it's the Taurus, it's the stubborn in me. So I completely understand every aspect of my life. When someone's like, is that? I'm like, watch. So I love that you had that and you pushed forward anyway. Alexis, you had some thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I think for me, it was pretty obvious, or actually it wasn't obvious, but I figured out about the male aspect of being male dominated when I realized I was mostly listening to male voices. I've been obsessed with podcasts, like obsessed with them for maybe 5 or 6 years at this point, just consuming hours of content every week. I know when my favorite podcasts release their new episodes. One's on Monday, one's on Wednesday, but I follow them religiously. And it was like, oh, there are a lot more men that I'm listening to than women. Why is that, right? I think even it's sort of our responsibility also to figure out and pay attention to how we perpetuate that and be like, okay, it's time for me to kind of listen to some other voices, right? It never once dawned on me that going into it would be difficult as a woman. And I feel really lucky because I had a very different experience than Erin. I haven't noticed a single thing. Now, it's probably because I don't have that many listeners. My audience is small.
Yes.
So, hey, shout out to anyone who wants to start a podcast and have a small audience, right? You might not get that much pushback. But I've just had I think also being on the Queen City Podcast Network, Brian Baltasevich, who started the network here in Charlotte, he's incredibly inclusive. And so working with him was just fantastic. And I've been very careful from day one about trying to include diverse people, women, people of color on the podcast, because it's something that's an issue that's just really important to me. Mm-hmm. I haven't experienced too much pushback, but again, I think it's because I have a teeny little audience.
But I think it's interesting that you noticed as a listener what you were consuming, because I think it also, you're right, it does start there when you go through your own history. And if that's what you're consuming, what are other people consuming? And we know that stats show us that a large woman audience, and we are consuming not ourselves all the time. So I think being intentional and shifting your mindset is important, because we create the change we want to see. Sheri, Bernadette, did you have some insight on that question?
I was going to say embarrassing, but I had no idea. I had never listened to a podcast before I started my own podcast. Selfishly, the reason I started my podcast was because when I had paid off my student loans, I paid off $72,000 of student loans. People kept asking me, how did you do that? And I kept saying the same thing over again. I said to my husband, hey, it'd be awesome if I could just record my response and then I wouldn't have to repeat myself. He's like, that's called a podcast, right? I was like, oh, all right, I should record a podcast. So that's what I did. It wasn't until after the fact that I became acutely aware. I think both from the perspective of being a woman and a woman of color, that it wasn't until people pointed out, hey, ladies, you should listen to this podcast, or hey, Asian people, this is the first Asian person I've seen on a podcast. And it was like, oh, I didn't understand the optics of it until after the fact. And to be honest, I was, hesitant about it because I didn't go out here saying like, oh, I'm going to be the, the Asian girl that talks about money. I was just like, I'm Bernadette and I like to talk about money. And it wasn't until after the fact that I realized like, oh, that actually is resonating with people in a way that I didn't expect and turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how a lot of us do it. I know for me, with all of my Black girl magic, I am hesitant to, like, that is not my leading factor, but that is part of who I am, right? That's part of the energy of what makes me me. And I think we've just been trained. I think I'm willing to bet, Bernadette, we're not far in age. I think the time that we grew up, it wasn't a factor to talk about. Like, you were just existing as who you were. But I think there is power when you're like, oh, I am this, and that is special in this space. Mm-hmm. Sheri, did you have some thoughts?
When it comes to the whole podcasting business, it's an art and it's a craft and it's a business. Some of the powerful truths that apply to us as women in the business world apply in podcasting on steroids. And you can sum it up 3 steps. First, don't wait for permission. If you're waiting for permission, you're going to wait your whole life. If you're waiting to be invited or chosen, you're going to wait your whole life. So don't wait for permission. The second thing is, don't wait for expertise. One way that the guys in this space really have lapped us is that they don't wait to be experts in anything. Their subject matter, their technology, their distribution platform, the monetization. They just go, I'm going to have a podcast. And the next thing you know, they have a podcast. As women, sometimes we are, you look at all of the behavioral studies. As women, we apologize for taking up space. We apologize for our own expertise. We offer our expertise, but we preface it with an apology. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but you have a PhD in the subject, for crying out loud, right? And then the other thing, so P is for permission, E is for expertise, A is for approval. Women in our culture, we are socialized to seek approval and validation. And when we don't get that approval and validation, it can feel really threatening. So we've all lived this in other areas of our life, right? We all know what I'm talking about here, that asking for permission, apologizing for taking up space, feeling like I'd like to do that podcast, but I'm not expert enough yet in fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. And then when we put the product out there and we aren't met with, buttloads of approval and validation, we begin to doubt ourselves. Yeah. But the podcast space, less so today than it was even a handful of years ago, is kind of a wild frontier. And the people that settle a wild frontier, they load up their pack mules and their wagons, and they go out there not really knowing if there are bears, not really knowing if there's going to be a blizzard, if they're going to survive the winter. They go out there and they rely on their own instincts and their own abilities and their own natural gifts and talents to save them. And as women, that is something I think that we struggle with. And the podcasting space, which is super male and super competitive and a free-for-all, and only just now, as we're speaking, are there beginning to be like codes and boundaries and metrics and measurements that can be taken to the bank or taken into the marketplace. That's only just now happening. So exciting, because we're in at the ground floor. This is a space where you cannot be tentative, you cannot be hesitant, and you can't apologize for being here.
Those are all things I'm going to say, guys in the audience, if you have not put that in your tool belt, I think that is accurate. I have someone I know who always says before she does something, if she gets to the moment where she questions it, she always asks, what would a mediocre dude do? And
exactly.
Yeah. He's just going to do it anyway. Hey, there's a promotion on the table. Am I qualified? No, but I'm gonna put in this application. And so I think everyone reiterated it, like, we just have to get to the point where we are going to do a thing and then be comfortable in that space. And like Bernadette said, hold on to what makes you special in that space, because that's key, instead of shedding it. I think you had something to add in. No, you hit you're high-fiving, not raising your hand.
Hi.
Listen.
Yes.
I got
have to be careful, because I was about to do a testimony and I was like, nope, they're going to think I have to speak again.
Exactly. That's where my eyes are, guys. My eyes are on you to go. So you guys who talks about, and I'm already feeling this, just this goes beyond podcasting, and that's what I'm loving this, like taking up space as women where you are. Now, when you started to push your content, do you take into consideration what you're up against, or do you just go, this is what I have and this is my content? Does it ever occur to you? Because I find myself in some spaces, I don't even care how male dominated it is. Like, I'm here, I'm gonna do a thing. But have you gotten to a point where you ever hesitated before you took a leap in this world, or before you released an episode? Did you step back and pause, or did it not even occur to you what you're up against?
I'll jump in. So like I said, when I started podcasting, we were all like, riding in on dinosaurs. I mean, it was in the beginning, there was no way to fail. I mean, nobody knew what the heck you were talking about. So that wasn't so much an issue. But today, where we all are sitting today, the person that you're most competing against is yourself. The minute you take your eyes off of that, you're chasing a level of excellence. You're chasing an idea. Sometimes you can't really articulate the feeling that you're trying to put together, the product you're trying to create. The only competition you have is yourself. There are 750,000 podcasts out there. There are podcasts for everything. There are podcasts for people that keep bees, and financial podcasts, and podcasts like mine, podcasts like yours. They're all out there. If you allow yourself to think about that, you get rattled. One of the lessons that the mediocre guys can teach us, and believe me, I work in radio. I have to be a freaking superstar pulling rabbits out of my hat. The guys next to me can be half drunk with no pants, okay? Like, the bar is just lower for them. The thing that you have to remember is that the only thing you can control is what you are creating. So make yourself your biggest competitor. Set your bar against yourself and chase that. Anything else is going to make you crazy, and it's going to fill you with self-doubt, and you're going to lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, beating yourself up over the most random things, and nobody wins that way. Nobody.
I love that. And I love what you said, Alexis.
I wanted to add on to that, because it's, for me, I don't even think about myself in competition with other podcasters, or maybe it's because I'm not trying to monetize this, right? I'm not trying to make $1 million doing this. But for me, it's about, do I think there are people out there who need to hear what I have to say? Mm-hmm. Do I think there's an audience out there that will benefit from someone talking about their failures and their insecurities, and how, even though they weren't sure if they could do it, they did it, they tried, they failed, they did it again, they tried, they failed a little less, they just kept going and eventually made it, right? That's what resilience is. It's like Dory, you just keep swimming, right? Yes. So for me, it's not necessarily competition, but I have to trust that, okay, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to feel vulnerable. I'm going to feel naked. I'm going to feel a little insecure. I might say the wrong thing. I might not look the right way, because God knows we haven't even talked about that yet. But there's going to be someone out there who benefits from hearing this. And even if it's a small group, I think that's worthwhile. So that's really what I focus on. And it also helps me, and I work with clients who are afraid of public speaking. And I think when you focus on the people that you might help, and you take that pressure off yourself to be perfect, then it becomes kind of more meaningful, because you're connected to why you're doing it and why it's important, not just what it is you're doing.
I love that. It's not about the metrics. Like, you guys are not logging on every day, like, where are my metrics at? You're really trying to shape some content for the people who are going to listen. I think that is phenomenal in itself. I think the more authentic you are when you're serving people through your words, no matter what genre you're in, people pick up on that. People want to be a part of that. And that's how communities happen. And I think the more authentic you are, the better it resonates with your audience. I can tell you, I have some podcasts that I'm like, I can no longer listen to you, because you were actually not, you are not authentic. I'm not feeling it. I saw you out here in these streets. That is not how you were. But I think what you guys are doing is forging your path. So it's creating your content, but in a way that is still very much you. You didn't go out and manufacture a persona for your podcast to make it more anything, which is beautiful. All right, lovely people who are listening, you guys are yassing. I see you. Here's the time where you guys get to ask some questions of your own. You don't need to hear me talk all night. It's not that entertaining. We also established you don't want to hear me sing anymore. So let's get some questions asked. Oh my goodness, they're coming in. All right. I will say this up front. As I am relaying questions, y'all, I may not get to all questions. Do not come for me later. Do not DM me. Do not again fill this out in your feedback form. I'm going to try and get to as many questions as possible, but I may not get to them all. And also know that the podcast festival is going, and there may be some content that you can pick up in another podcast session that works for this. All right. Let's see. Oh, you guys are going so fast. I'm like, wait. Thanks, Deanna. I appreciate that. This is the best. I'm gonna print this out and like put this above my desk every day because you guys are hyping me up. I need this.
One thing, Tiffany, we're talking about how the podcast world is so dominated by male voices.
Mm-hmm.
One piece of data that I can share that's really compelling is that podcasts are overwhelmingly discovered through other podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And so one way that we as female podcasters can help move the ball down the field, to use a jock kind of dude analogy, is by telling the people who listen to us about other wonderful podcasts. For example, there's a podcast called Accused, and it's hosted by a public radio reporter named Amber Hunt, and she is phenomenal. Like, I'm the biggest fangirl ever of Amber Hunt and this podcast called Accused. And I recommend this to everyone I can. It's one of many, many podcasts that I listen to, but I really love her work and I want her voice to get a wider audience. People discover podcasts by listening to podcasts. So it's on us, it's on me to tell my audience, hey, instead of recommending they do X, Y, or Z, I send them to Bernadebt, because Bernadebt can help them pay off $300,000 worth of debt in 10 minutes. I mean, I want to send the people that listen to me to you. I want to make sure that those female voices are amplified. I met Joni Deutsch, who's in charge of this whole podcast festival, when she reached out to me about the She Says podcast. And I tripped over myself being able to promote that and share that message, because that's how it happens. That's the secret sauce. And part of the reason that there are so many dudes on podcasting is because one talks about the next, and then he talks about his buddy, and then they all talk about Joe Rogan. And before you know it, they're all driving Teslas to the bank. We have to do that too. That falls right in there with don't ask for permission or wait for expertise or approval. We have the map. Now we just have to follow it, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes personal sense. I love your sports analogy. I'm going to go with mediocre dude. Okay. And I think you also just helped answer one of the questions. They were talking about networking, and, someone answered them about some actual networks and groups of female podcasters. But I think what you just said about linking each other, like when you finish and say, oh man, you should check out so-and-so. She's got some great content about this. You should check out so-and-so. I think that goes a long way. Mm-hmm. People trust you when you're like, oh my God, I listened to this podcast about this thing and it was fantastic. You should check it out. Whoever you're talking to is like, you know what? I trust Sheri. I trust her opinion. Let me go check it out. And that is how you add on to someone else. And I think that goes into my sisters doing it for themselves song. I'm not going to sing it again, but I think that is part of what builds. You guys are adding on to each other. One of my questions that I am getting is, you guys, some of you have very specific business-like podcasts, and some of you have podcasts that are based on your personal lives. So how do you juggle, if you have a personal podcast, how do you juggle the level of authenticity in what you show? And then if you have a business one, what have you found different, and how do you keep it different from your personal life?
I can go on this one because mine's very unique where it's a professional podcast, but it's also for a client of mine. What I did with them first and foremost was kind of set expectations, because I was like, just so you know, I like to curse. I'm being very clean tonight, y'all. Keeping it PG. And I was like, I just need to make sure that you are okay if I talk about, controversial topics, if we get off, however it is, and that we curse. And I set those expectations up at first. And I think that was a way to have, for my end, for being professional and also working with a client on that, expectations and understanding that I wanted it to be authentic. I wanted people to know that if I was going to host it, it wasn't just me being robotic, and it was going to have my flair to it. But I wanted to make sure if they were okay with, one of the guests we had on is very big into the cannabis industry. And I wanted to make sure that they were okay if we started talking about not only the marketing, the legality of the cannabis industry, but, if they were okay, if someone just happened to say a personal anecdote about, oh, I want it to be legal, I smoke all the time, like whatever. I just wanted to make sure they were okay with that. And once we set up those expectations of allowing me to run with it, it worked out really, really well. And I found out that you can mix personal and professional. It's just up to you of how much of yourself you want to have out there. I think that's what we all need to think about is, again, like we've been saying, authenticity is key. People will see right through you if you're not authentic, even if you have incredible episodes and topics. But again, about just, figuring out what's the best way that's going to represent you, what's going to represent your insight, what's going to represent your passion, and just making sure you stay true to that.
Awesome. I love it. I think that's a good answer. I mean, of course, I'm not going to say it was a bad answer, but no, that really is a good answer.
I appreciate that.
To chime in.
You
I was going to say, I'll take the kind of the flip side of this question, which is, I think absolutely is so important to be authentic. And we need another word for authentic. I can't.
Right.
But, and I very much try to do so. Like my first season of my podcast is entirely about my life. It's very personal. We talk about how I got into huge fights with my parents and my family, and my friends hated, there's a lot of, there's stuff that I was also like, ooh, should I say this? Because I'm going to piss off somebody that I know. But at the same time, while I think there is that quality of putting yourself out there, I think it's very important, if you do have a podcast that's personal, that you also draw a line of like, this is the Bernadette on the podcast, and this is Bernadette in real life, as in they're not necessarily like, not one is different or the other, that they're fake. But I'll give you a perfect example. Yesterday, after I had, this segment on Good Morning America, somebody wanted to come at me and say, your story is fake. There is no way this happened, whatever, right? And if I was like, well, you know what? The Bernadette that's out there that everyone thinks they know is the person that they are attacking, and that's me, and that's all of me, then I would have taken it way more personally than realizing like, you know what? That person doesn't know me. They don't know my story. They don't know who I am. I mean, what is out there is out there, but it's not my entire story. So I think there's a balance that you have on being authentic, but protecting your personal identity.
I think you're right. I have a very clear boundary line between, Tiffany at home, the mom, what that looks like, and Tiffany, the creator in the world. And I keep a boundary, not because I don't like my children, I like them very much, but it's one of those things where I'm like Jennifer Garner, where I'm like, no, you don't need to be around my children. Someone asked, and I think Erin, you mentioned you like the tech side. So maybe you know this question, and it's in the chat. So I will say there is a follow-up answer in the chat to this, but I'm going to ask our panel to see if they have some insight. When we're talking about, you guys each kind of have a role as the personality, but what about jobs and producing podcasts? Do you come across female producers? Do you know a great resource for any future female producers? And I'm tossing it to Erin because you already mentioned you like tech.
That's fine. I have a couple resources for that, actually. So on my podcast, although I like the tech, I knew I didn't want to be involved with it on this podcast. Luckily, as we've been talking about, the Queen City Podcast Network, who is a sponsor, produces my podcast, and Sarah, who's one of their producers, is majority of the time is my producer. So I do, I have seen, and I do work with female producers. I would say some of the best things I have seen for people who I know who've looked for opportunities has been through their community colleges, or if there are broadcasting schools in the area, that if you've either taken classes, or sometimes they will post job openings or opportunities or internships. I saw someone say Sarah is awesome, Bernadette. Yeah. But there are opportunities in community colleges, especially those that have a focus on the technical side. I know there are probably more, like we've been talking about, like different groups to get involved with. There's probably producer groups that have job boards. I know that the people that I've interacted with that are producers have gone through the community college here in Charlotte and have found opportunities because people will put up of like, hey, we're starting a podcast looking for someone with experience, and they'll find it that way. Or even on good old Facebook, people have found opportunities on there. I don't know if anyone has any other insight. Those are just where I know people have gotten opportunities.
I was going to ask Sheri, because I know you have some history in radio and some of that translates into the podcast world. So do you have some suggestions in that arena too?
Well, again, I'm not a fan of waiting until you're an expert to dive in and start something. The barrier to entry in podcasting is really low. I've been working from home, doing a radio show and a handful of podcasts since March. And I think my entire gear setup was maybe $500. I mean, the barrier to entry is low. The technology is not hard to use. The hardest part is finding an audience. And there's no expertise to be learned that way. You find your audience by doing good work and putting it out there, and then following the math. If you want your podcast to get out there, reach out to other like-minded podcasts and ask to be a guest on their show, invite them to be a guest on yours, do some reciprocity. That's the quickest and easiest way to begin building an audience. You can go to bnhcamera.com for a few $100s, have pretty much state-of-the-art recording equipment in your bedroom. So this business where, we need to find someone to teach us how to do things, I'm not a fan. The podcast world is a fast moving ride, and you need to just go ahead and jump on and figure it out when you get there. And I also wanted to say, I was thinking about this, listening to the attack on Bernadette after her appearance on Good Morning America. Something that I think all performers struggle with, and artists, and I think women in this space, is we confuse criticism of our work with criticism of ourselves. People can absolutely despise your work, and you're still a perfectly lovely child of God. That is a boundary that we all need as creators to have. This understanding that I'm going to put this product out there and not everybody's going to like it. And some people are going to call bullshit on it. And some people are going to be like, oh, you shouldn't quit your day job. That's cool. That's fine. They're entitled to that opinion. Keep moving. Find something that suits you better. As women, we really, really do not have the luxury of being tentative. We don't have the luxury of taking our time. We have got to be ballsy. We've got to be assertive. And even if we're terrified, we have to present fearlessness. It's the only way. It's the only way forward here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is 100% accurate. My favorite thing to tell myself, if I'm in a space where I'm a little nervous, I'd love to go, yeah, you're scared, do it scared. Because at the end of the day, I'm only harming myself if I step back. If I step back and decide not to enter a space or not to do anything, listen, mediocre dude over here, he's still winning. He's still winning at whatever he's doing. Like you said, Sheri, he could show up beard up and pants down and still, unfortunately, be winning in the arena. But if we talk ourselves off the ledge, then we do nothing but harm ourselves, which is unfortunate. I have one question I'm going to ask. Sarah, are you willing to unmute yourself to ask this yourself? Because I think it would be good coming from you. We'll see. If not, I will ask.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, hey, Sarah.
Hiya. I'm sorry. I'm outside. I hope there's not too much noise here. I've had the experience in a number of different kinds of settings where I felt like, yes, I know how to talk professionally and tactfully, but still, being assertive, taking up space wasn't always well received. And, I might be left out of email chains or not, eventually not included in staff meetings or, when I was working in the restaurant industry, I might be, denied shifts. Those shifts I might have gotten would go to somebody else. And it's, there's a lot of favoritism that takes place. And while I hear a lot of really wonderful, encouraging conversation, invariably in these kinds of conversations, I don't hear tactics for combating the pushback that you will get from somebody just trying to be, an active team player or be yourself.
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, I'm sorry. Obviously, that's very frustrating. I think a lot of people on here have certainly experienced similar situations. One is, can you find an ally at work who can speak up for you? Sometimes men come in handy in that way when we can get the right person on our team and kind of show them what's happening. I've noticed that a lot of men, and again, I'm speaking in very broad strokes, right? Hashtag not all men. But some men don't even know that they're cutting you off. Some men don't even know that they're interrupting. Some men don't even know that they're mansplaining. And eventually, when you sort of point it out, it might take time, but they eventually can see it. I found that if I can get someone on my side, then they can be a great ally to work with me to sort of invade or break into the spaces where I am not being allowed. The second thing are what other resources are available to you? Is HR available to you? I think also, and one of the ways that I've encouraged other women to kind of navigate this, especially if you're in a company that has a mission or a vision statement, we've seen very lofty, luscious, delightful, inclusive, beautiful mission and vision statements from companies. And then you see behind the scenes that they're not really living up to their mission. So I tend to use their words against them in a meeting and say, hey, listen, can I have a meeting with you? I would really like to talk about how my experience as a colleague here, as an employee here, is in stark contrast to the external messaging that we're promoting. And I'm wondering if, there's a disconnect here that we can work on. What steps are in place within our own department for us and our team to live our mission, because I think we can do better and I'd like to be part of the solution. So that's sort of a tactic and a technique that I've used before, and it's worked out fairly well. But again, I think it depends on the kind of company that you're working within. I waited tables for 10 years to put myself through grad school at a little diner. That would not have worked. That would not have gotten me more shifts. They would have said, get the hell out. But again, depending on the kind of place where you are, that might be a tactic to take.
I was going to say, I was going to piggyback off of you, Alexis, because I've worked I was in the military once upon a time, many tricks of Tiffany. And I worked in a completely male-dominated area. There were 4 women in our whole shop. What I started doing, which I learned from someone, is I also, before I went to HR and before I found an ally, I kept track. I tracked everything. I tracked every incident, every situation, every scenario. So when I was coming, I wasn't just coming with my feelings, because sometimes men don't hear those things. What are feelings? I didn't hear it. So I came with, every time I keep a log, this is what happened today, and it's factual. And so when I have to talk to HR or a supervisor or a manager in that position, or when I'm working to get someone on my side, I have something to present other than that. Your feelings are valid. I'm not saying that, trust me. I'm an advocate of feelings. However, some people can't hear you because of their own biases and issues. And so carrying that with you always help. That log Someone called it, you call it a lawsuit folder. I love it, but I do. I keep it to this day, and I enjoy what I do for work, but I also keep it anytime there's an incident because, one, I may not recall it at the time, every detail of it, but two, sometimes the best way for people to listen to you is when you present them with information in a way that it happened and it's factual. Here's the thing that happened to me once. HR was like, I've never heard of this problem. Can you share? I got 3 pages to share with you. Hold on, let me break it out for you. But it helps you because if you're tracking and logging, it won't turn around tomorrow, but it is documented, and you are taking the lead to document it. And knowing your risk, like Alexis says, knowing where you worked. Sometimes I know my worth is worth what it's worth, so I'm gonna push it. Now I know some places I've worked, they're gonna push back. Am I comfortable with that? I've already described my personality, so I think you guys know I'm comfortable with the pushback. But you have to decide where you are in that comfort level of how that's going to shake up, because you carry that. Because they can be like, I've never seen this issue. I'm not going to sit down until something is respected. And we're all at that. It's not even age. I know I say all the time, I'm too old for this. It's not age. We as humans deserve respect in our fields of work and all spaces we take up. And you are the one who has to advocate and demand that. And sometimes just bring your extra arsenal with you as you are asking for that. Sheri, did you have some insight on that? I thought I saw your hand.
Well, look, my entire broadcasting career has been one long, beautiful microaggression. Okay. And, I'm in a business that's performance-based, but I think every business is performance-based, whether it's an advertising agency, a university, a restaurant, a team, it's all performance-based. So one lesson that I learned from the guys that were always all around me, I was very often the only woman in the room, was that as long as they were performing, they were golden. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, well then the obvious thing here is to perform at a very high level, which is exhausting. And I hate to put that out there, like, hey girl, you just need to be stronger, faster, better. But the other reality is that, again, no one's going to give you permission to sit at that table, and no one is going to shower you with validation. You have to have a really thick, not even a skin, you got to have a hide, like an armadillo, like things have to ricochet off of you. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be successful in any environment, in any business endeavor. And I will give you one little thing that has really worked for me. And this always surprises people because I talk for a living. So you would think that I'm just, Miss Talking McTalkface. But I deploy a powerful, inscrutable silence as my ultimate nuclear weapon. If I'm hearing some shit from you that doesn't sit with me, I don't defend myself. I don't apologize. I sit back and I let you talk, and I let your words hang in the air, and I let you sit there with what you're saying. And when I am ready to respond, I respond. And sometimes it's not in the same day. And there is nothing that will make people more horribly uncomfortable than a thoughtful, inscrutable silence. I'm also a social worker, so I'm trained in clinical listening and active listening. When I'm silent, I am listening to everything you're saying. I'm watching your nonverbals and I'm paying attention. And I have been in meetings where, again, I'm the only woman in the room and everyone's like 20 years older than I am. And I watch those boys talk themselves through such a circle that by the time they're finished, they come back and I'm getting what I came for. So this is why I say, don't wait for the permission. Don't look for the approval. Don't hold your breath to be an expert. When you're right, you're right. Stand your ground. And sometimes standing your ground means sitting there with a neutral face, completely silent, and letting other people talk. And I don't know if that's been any of y'all's experience in the corporate world or in the academic world, but I'm here to tell you that's what reality is like in my corner of the world.
Oh, absolutely. And I was going to say, I agree with everything that you're saying. And also, don't be afraid to necessarily challenge what if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And, the simplest example I can give you recently, I had a client who is like typical older white male. And, he wanted to take my expertise, and he wanted to offer me a job. And I said, well, I don't want to work for you, but you can be my client. And he said, well, if you were going to, work for us, and are you going to quit your own business? I said, no, why would I do that? And he said, well, I just don't understand how you'd be able to do both. And I said, would you be saying this to me if I had kids? And he said, nothing. He said nothing. Right. And so if it doesn't feel right, if someone's saying something to you and it's like, that doesn't sound right, it's okay to ask the question. But I asked it in a way that was like, oh, would you say that if I had kids? I didn't say, would you say that if I had kids? I didn't say it that way. I said, would you say this if I had kids? And he had nothing to say back to that. Right. So don't be afraid to challenge if you think that something is not right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to, Sheri, I've done the silence thing, and it is beautiful.
It's gorgeous.
Beautiful. Sometimes my face says enough. This is my face.
I've had men with monogrammed shirts and cufflinks say to me, could you just say something?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's it. I've gotten in trouble once for my silence, and they're like, because they were like, that is so disrespectful. I was keeping silent for a reason. We did not want
paying attention to you. That's not disrespect. I'm giving you my full attention.
Yeah.
I think you've done mine before. I'm giving you my full attention.
Yes. I'm going to use that. That is now in my arsenal. All right, ladies, listen, we have stretched our hour, but I love it. I know, it's crazy, right? We have stretched it. So first I want to say thank you, guys. Tell everyone where to find you. I know some of you have your socials in your name. Tell them where to find you really quickly, your podcast and your socials.
I'll go. I'm already talking. Again, Erin Breeden, thank you all again so much. This was so fun. I kind of wanted to keep going because I think I'm getting just as much out of this as probably our listeners and our viewers right now. Connect with me. You can find me. It's just Erin Breeden. You can find me on all the socials and the podcast, Advent Coworking Podcast. You can find it on anywhere you listen to podcasts. We are in a bit of a break right now as we are recalculating from 2020, but we are coming back in January of 2021 with new insights and information. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. And I see some of you shared it. Bernadette shared hers in the chat with us. Thank you, Bernadette. Alexis shared hers in the chat. Sheri, do you want to share where they can find you?
Let's see. My podcasts are available everywhere podcasts are served. I put out 8 podcasts a week. It's a lot. For someone who doesn't like to talk, it's a lot. You can find me on Instagram for your quality cat content at Sheri Lynch 1. On Twitter, if your politics are slightly lefty, I'm there at Sheri Lynch. I'm all over Facebook. I have a website, BOBANDSHERI.com. My company is called Now Media, and we consider ourselves to be audio creators with a primary focus on broadcast media. So I strongly encourage all of you, including you, Sarah V., to go ahead and grab the steering wheel and be entrepreneurial about this and reach out to me, and I'm happy to chat.
I love it. Everyone who is watching, in case you didn't catch the note, if you want to save the chat, just hit the 3 dots up on your right and you can save that. Remember, this recording is coming to you in about a month. Let us wrap up all the things. And we'll have the recording out to you. Thank you to all of our panel. You guys, if I had a fire emoji, I'm throwing it at you right now. I'm throwing the fire emoji at you. Boom, woo, boom. It was lit in here. I shouldn't say that. If my children heard me say lit, I'd be in trouble. For you guys, I already broke the rule in saying to you guys, I'm just going to say it was lit in here. All right, party people, I've got a few things just for you guys before we head out. Please, if you're going to share what you heard today or are taking screenshots or just telling everybody, I did this thing and it was incredible, you should join it too, please join us. Tell them to join. The festival is still going. We will be here for, 2 more weeks? We're not going anywhere. So suggest your friends join us. Some of our panelists will be speaking in other sessions, so definitely check them out. See what they're up to. Come join us. Hashtag all your socials with what you're talking about with CLT Podfest. We'd love to see where you're up to. I already saw someone tag me in there. I see you. And I'm here for it, which is great. It's great that you found me because I never share who I am, but I love it. Someone already found me from today's session and was like, I took a screenshot of you. I am here for it. So CLT podcast and your hashtags. Let us know what you think, what you encourage us to do further. If you have any feedback, remember, you can't talk about my bad singing in this feedback. All right. CLT Podcast Fest. Tag it in all your socials. Make sure you join us on Friday. We do have podcast happy hour. So if you had a good time, grab you some wine, grab you some beer, come back Friday and join us. Catch up with some of your favorite panelists from the week and with each other if you really had some good insight. This is my most favorite so far, not just for our panelists, but you guys in the chat were like here for it, which made me even more hyped to be here with you guys today.
Tiffany, it was like you said, sisters doing it for themselves. That's what it's all about. That's what we got to do.
I love it. Again, thank you all. Please join us further podcasts. I will see you later. Good night, all. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye,
Good night, all. Thank you.